Hi, Greg.
Hello, Hugh.
We're going to talk about the Hill family tonight.
Yeah, that's the same family that came up to Marietta recently, right as I was told not to tell your story. Here we got today, we got General A.P. Hill from the Civil War, his statue being removed in Richmond, Virginia today. I don't think
Yeah.
that's a coincidence.
No, I know it's not. And I'm on the north side, not the south side. And behind me, this is my farm. It was 30 square acres. It's the Manning Civil War Ranch. And this is where the north turned the south back in Mossheim, Tennessee during the Civil War. And that farm behind me um, was given to me at a price I couldn't not afford. And then uh, they by Mr. Manning, and Manning co-created the JFK archives with Garrison, my alumni, where I taught. So Garrison Manning set me up on this Civil War ranch, and then they proceeded to murder my family. While I lived on this Civil War ranch, uh, three of my wives were murdered, dismembered and murdered. One was hung in a dog's leash, and they were all murdered on holidays. One was murdered Christmas Day. Another one was murdered on my birthday, July 4th. And the third one was murdered on Halloween Eve. Her ears were cut off, and I had to bury her without her ears. And the sheriffs never made out murder reports. They said they were going to leave these murders up to God. So in my life, it seems like Biden and Clinton and Trump are giving you Black history as they replace my white family with Black history. And if my history doesn't matter, then Black history doesn't matter either, because my family founded the country.
Right. It's
And
definitely no coincidence, Hugh, that the president brought back Griner from Russia, and she was wearing your number 42, just like Jackie
no,
Robinson's.
it
The
never is.
numbers
And
from your
Griner, why was Griner put in prison? For drugs?
for drugs, yeah.
And then she reached out and shook the hand of the drug dealer that she was traded for. And the guy she was traded for was a mafia arms dealer in New York.
Unbelievable.
And she was put in prison for dealing drugs.
Right. But
Uh,
she matters. The other guy doesn't matter,
yeah,
they
and
said.
then they put my four too, and that's a whole history of its own.
Mhm.
They doubled me when I was four and murdered my twin. They kidnapped us with Sirhan's kid
Mhm.
in our public school and handed me over to five people who tortured and raped us. And now Black history matters, but the history of my family doesn't matter. And I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and my family was the north side, not
Right,
the south side. But
right,
my family did do things like create Ohio and Virginia and Michigan and a good portion of the country because we were the founders. We were the
mhm,
founding family of America. And Admiral Byrd is my uncle, and anybody can go to any library and see that because Admiral Byrd is my family member. I'm related to all the kings in Europe
right,
prior to us becoming a country. So my own family kicked their own cousins out of the country and created America. But my history doesn't matter.
right. Yeah, it's insane what they're doing.
Now, Hill was never my friend. Hill married into the Kennedy family after Kennedy was murdered.
Mhm.
After all the Kennedys were murdered, the Hill family married into the Kennedy family, and like Schwarzenegger did. And then I noticed that Tina Turner, her husband was Hill. Her son that just died was Hill. And then in my life, the Hill family kidnapped my daughter when she was 7. And they were drug dealers living behind my house on a farm I bought from Donald Trump's tax attorneys in New York, Mazar.
Hill was the name of the other little girl that was kidnapped, wasn't she?
Well, that family kidnapped my daughter off her school bus. My daughter would never walk 5 miles down the road to an excavation company getting off her school bus. She always came in and started helping me with the farm that I purchased.
Right.
She would never get off her school bus and walk 5 miles down the street. She was kidnapped by the Hill family, who were drug dealers, and I was the guy stopping the drugs.
Okay.
That's on my farm in Utica, Michigan. You had the Blanchard family, the Hill family, and Blanchard was governor of Michigan. One of the Blanchard girls would watch my daughter some days. Hill's daughter became my daughter's friend, and Blanchard and Hill and a guy named Henry Bouguet, who was a pharmacist in Utica, Michigan, Bucky Larson, a guy by the name of Danielson, and Nagy, who helped, he was Lee Iacocca's son-in-law, and Nagy helped President Kennedy's press secretary out of the White House use my trademark on his last book called Bottomline after writing the book 7 Days in May. And he pointed me out to the world by using my stolen trademark. As DuPont and Trump. Trump held the Bottomline events on his property, the 4th event and the 5th event. And that's when I was kidnapped and my twin was murdered in Michigan. And then Trump had a habit of borrowing money from my family's banks and never paying a penny back. And now you have Biden giving you Kamala Harris, and I'm the Harris family in the Smithsonian, and Kamala is not my family member. She's a prosecutor, and her husband's an entertainment lawyer, and my entertainment trademark, Bottomline Publishing, was stolen in 1969, and it was $3 trillion of theft. And then I divorced my wife because her and her father and another man attempted to murder me on 3 different occasions. So I divorced her and I bought this farm, and Mazar set me up on it, but not the farm behind me. This farm is 20 years later. And my wives were still alive when I stopped the drug trade. The senators were running with the CIA, and it was an illegal gun and drug trade. And they ended up chasing Noriega into the Vatican, and the communist Pope gave him sanctuary in the Vatican after I stopped millions of dollars of cocaine and LSD and weed in Michigan. Back then, you'd go to jail for 30 years for one joint. This was in 1970s and 80s. Drugs were still illegal in this country.
Right.
And the types of drugs that were on that farm I purchased were all illegal: cocaine, heroin, LSD. He was selling the amphetamines, and they were making the LSD. And I stopped this trade when I moved on the property because I learned that kids were overdosing in my driveway, taking ice cream off a Good Humor truck that Henry owned. And Henry was this pharmacist in Utica, and he was not only was he selling illegal drugs, he tried to recruit me into his drug family and get me to sell drugs at the bars and lounges I performed in as Bottomline, and I just outright told him no. I don't do drugs. So after
And
these,
so Hill is part of all this. That's why he doesn't want your story told.
Yeah, Hill was part of the drug dealers, that family. And Hill married into the Kennedy family. I believe they live in the Kennedy compound right now. about
Yeah,
after,
Saoirse Kennedy
after,
Hill, right?
yeah, after the Kennedy
Mhm.
brothers were murdered, Bobby and John.
Yeah,
Um, and I might be wrong about that. I'm not real up to date on the Kennedy family and when they married, but I believe the Hill family married into that family after John F. Kennedy was murdered. And I'm the truth of his murder. And I don't think it, I know it. And I'm the truth
yeah.
of Hoffa's murder. So the Hill family took my daughter
Hill
out.
was running behind the limo as Kennedy was killed. He jumped over top of Jacqueline right after Kennedy was shot, and he guarded over top of Jacqueline.
Yeah. So the Hill
The,
family's a famous family.
yeah.
And he was CIA or Secret Service, and that same family was running an illegal gun and drug trade on the property I got from Trump's tax attorney. And that turned out to be they were selling guns. Did I lose you again? Are you still there, Greg?
You're back right now, so let's just roll with it, I think.
Okay, it keeps telling me that my connection is unstable. It's probably because of snow in the mountains. So, anyways, the Hill family was helping Henry and Blanchard and Larson and the rest of them, and Danielson and Nagy, the Iacocca son-in-law, sell drugs all over Michigan for this illegal gun and drug trade. The senators were selling drugs or guns to Mexican cartels, and when the Mexican cartel didn't have enough money to pay for the guns, they would give the senators drugs, and then the senators were laundering the drugs. In the backyard of this farm I purchased, it had worker homes in the back, and the people in the back of my home were all drug dealers. And I didn't know this until after I moved in. When I moved in, I put an end to it, but then the police put me in jail for a year and kidnapped and raped my daughter via the Hill family. I'm not real happy about that. And then I noticed that when I left that farm, got out of jail a year later and left that farm, I had left Bobby Brooks, my cousin, and her boyfriend Jesse watching my kids while I went to jail. I made them guardians, and when I came out of jail, Brooks and Jesse had thousands and thousands of baggies of LSD and cocaine on my kitchen table, and my kids were in the next room. And then Larson tried to shoot me with a gun, and Bobby Brooks, Roberta Brooks, stopped him. And Brooks was my aunt, Dorothy, my aunt Doris Brooks, and Brooks was L. Brooks Patterson's family. And they murdered my friend right in his own jail cell when I told him I was kidnapped by Osborne and Darrell Hall and Long and Wallace and Anderson 20 years earlier. When I told L. Brooks Patterson's nephew that I was kidnapped by these governors and by my public school system, he was hung in L. Brooks Patterson's jail cell that night. And his name was Oglesby and his mother was Brooks. And Brooks is the same girl that was doing the drugs with the senators and Jesse and Bucky and Henry in my home when I made him guardian and went to jail. So I went to jail because I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade being run by the CIA, Senate, and people in Utica, Michigan. And the ones who weren't dealing drugs were just turning a blind eye to it and did nothing about it. And as a result, little kids, 3 and 4 and 7, were being overdosed and ended up in hospitals on things like cocaine and LSD. As soon as that came to my attention, being a father with kids, I stopped it. And that's the same reason I divorced my wife, my second wife. She wouldn't stop dealing drugs. And then when I asked her to stop dealing drugs, then they started trying to murder me. And I've documented this in many places, in videos and posts. Pastor Nick was in that song, We Didn't Start the Fire, and Pastor Nick gave me 3 pills, and any 2 pills in any combination are deadly. And doctors are taught this in med school 101. And 2 doctors at Beaumont Royal Oak, I signed myself into that hospital. They found all 3 of those pills in me, and Pastor Nick and my wife were giving them to me. And then after that, her father took a night scope on a rifle, and as I stood over where he buried Jimmy Hoffa, he put the night scope on me and told me he was going to kill me. And I was there picking up my kids and my wife. So that whole family, because I told them to stop dealing drugs, tried to murder me. So I divorced them. And there was a lot more to that. That whole family knew I was kidnapped at 4, and they were using me for money. And the biker gangs they ran stole my inheritance by marrying my aunt. My aunt forged my name on stock with my stepbrother, didn't give me my inheritance, and then she was dead a week later, and the biker from my wife's family ran off with my inheritance. And my wife and her mother and father, they were all 50 years older than me. My wife was 12 years older than me, and she went to school with my brother. So then I end up, after divorcing her, with another group of drug dealers on a farm that Trump's tax attorney sold to me. And when I stopped it, it turned out to be the drugs that the Senate was running. They were laundering the drugs in Michigan to the auto companies that they were getting as payment for the guns they were given to the cartel leaders. And that's what was going on in my neighborhood when I was 24. And my wife was in her 30s when Pastor Nick and her father attempted to murder me. And I had asked her for 4 or 5 years to stop selling drugs, and she just wouldn't. So I divorced her. Ended up in a worse situation because of the Senate and White House. And then this farm behind me, when I moved to Tennessee to get away from all the drugs and the people I divorced because they were trying to murder me, they came there and murdered my wives on holidays. They dismembered and murdered my wives, and police helped them do it. My wife, I divorced. Her father was an ex-state policeman, and he was an ex-state policeman because he murdered a guy. And this is the guy that put a night scope on me as I went to pick up my wife and kids. And we weren't fighting over anything. He had no reason to do that other than I was standing. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
He had no reason to do that other than I was standing over the hole he filled in as Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. And his ex-wife was with Jimmy Hoffa as he disappeared, and the FBI detained me for Hoffa's murder. So that family that stole my inheritance with my own aunt and brothers tried to set me up as a bank robber, as a drug dealer, and as the guy who killed my own family member, Jimmy Hoffa. And they set me up with Whitey, who sold me a car. And these things tell me, how would they even know Whitey was in Michigan and selling cars, and they were going to kill Hoffa? And my mother-in-law had no business being at the Sly Fox. She didn't drive a truck. You understand this? Things like she introduced me, my mother-in-law and her daughter introduced me to Whitey. And then the FBI tried to detain me for my own family member Hoffa's murder because I bought a car from Whitey. And they did this weeks ahead of Hoffa disappearing. I know this family buried Hoffa. I don't think it, I know it. And
Yeah.
I've known it all my life. Because the FBI helped L. Brooks Patterson and the governor whose basement I was tortured and raped in runs the FBI's sex crime division to this day. If I call them about Hoffa's murder after they detained me, they hang up on me. And yet now they're saying that Hoffa's probably buried in New Jersey with my aunt's family who stole my inheritance. And I'm the guy, if he is buried there in a barrel, I'm the guy that would have drove him there working for Utica Packing in Michigan. But the FBI hangs up on me and won't take any reports from me. As soon as I call, the women at the front desk hang up. And they're told to do that.
Yeah, obviously.
And I don't make it a habit of calling the FBI. I've called them about Hoffa's murder, and I called them about dead kids carried across state lines. And both times they hung up on me. 5 times in one day, they just hung up, didn't take a report. And then I end up on this Utica, Michigan farm where the government's selling guns to cartels and laundering the drugs at the auto companies in Utica, Michigan. You had the Ford paint plant, you had Chrysler, you had Chevy there. And I knew all the auto companies because I designed robots for them. All my life, that's what I did. And like I'm saying, the Hill family was a drug dealer. Now I left that farm and got another job driving truck for Webb Trucking. He was a black guy, blind, and Audley Jackson, Michael Jackson's family, came to me and told me he knew where I could get another truck job after I stopped working for Morrison in Detroit when Hoffa was murdered. So I took him up, and I and Audley Jackson started driving truck cross country from gas refineries. We would deliver oil products into Michigan to Thompson McCulley. And my mechanic there at Thompson McCulley was Tina Turner's husband, Ike Turner from Ohio. And at that time, Tina Turner married Hill, and Hill was a drug dealer. And these same drug dealers were trying to set me up because I was being played on the radio and entertaining for about 50 years in Michigan as Bottomline. DuPont and
I mean, this fits into why CNN and all them work for the White House with the drugs, and they can cover this stuff up.
CNN's main journalist is Anderson Cooper. Anderson raped me. Cooper raped my daughter. That's where Hill took my daughter to Cooper, an excavation yard. And this was right after Hoffa was murdered. And they tried to frame me for Hoffa's murder. Are you still here, Greg? You still here, Greg? There, you're back, Greg. I lost you there for a moment. So I'm up in Whitmore Lake with Ike Turner. He's my mechanic on my semis with Audley Jackson, Michael Jackson's family. They gave me a house in the Virgin Islands that Epstein owned, but I never went there. And then from Ike Turner, the guy that worked with Ike Turner at Whitmore Lake truck stop was White Boy Rick. And White Boy Rick at that time was 15, and he used to come after school, and I told him about me stopping the gun and drug trade in Utica, Michigan. And then the FBI come along and put him in jail and said he was dealing drugs, and he wasn't dealing drugs. He was a drunk. He was drinking. And he was a little kid. So this is a great big cover up of the Hill family kidnapping my daughter with Cooper. And when you see Cooper as the Mini Cooper in London, that's no little thing, because because George Washington handed my family his sword in the first Mason's Lodge before we were a country. And then my family went on and made the country in 1776 after we kicked our cousins, the British, out. So the Queen knew exactly who she was attacking, and she used the Hill family to attack me.
Yeah.
Kennedy's family.
Right.
And Jackie Kennedy went and lived with Onassis. Hill kidnapped my daughter with Cooper, and now I have a Mini Cooper and Elon Musk, and they're all from the UK. This is the UK attacking my family who created America after George Washington gave my family his sword in 1750.
That stands the reason why I'm told I'm not supposed to talk about it when Hill comes to
They are still attacking every generation of my family. I got married to the mayor's daughter, the mayor of East Detroit. His daughter raped me. She got pregnant, asked me for a divorce, or asked me for money to get an abortion. I told her I don't believe in abortions. I said, I'll marry you. So we married. And a week after we were married, a detective in Warren, Michigan, who was supposed to be protecting me, I came home from work and he's laying on my kitchen floor in front of my daughter in her high chair, having sex with my wife on the floor. And I didn't divorce her for that because we had kids. But she went and lived with that detective for 2 weeks. I guess she was afraid of me after that, but I wasn't hollering at her. I just turned around, walked out the door, and come back the next night.
Yeah.
And I didn't divorce her. I gave it a lot of thought. I had a kid with her, and I didn't love her when she raped me to begin with.
Right.
And the detective was supposed to be protecting me from people who were trying to kill me. They had drugged me and stolen my car and then stole an airplane, and they were dealing drugs. And all of these drug dealers was my second wife's family. It was Cook and Perry of Apple, and they were bikers in my town. And my wife's family were running the bikers. And every time one of them died, they'd have the wake on her father's farm where he took a gun and tried to shoot me. Because
if anybody's watching this video and hasn't seen the last one we just made, they really need to go back and see that about Cook and Perry. That'll help all this make more sense.
Yeah, well, that's where Hill walked into my life. And then I noticed Hill again when the little girl was killed in the Kennedy compound. And that's the same people that kidnapped me in Oakland County, Michigan, when I was 4 in 57 on the day they murdered Admiral Byrd, are the people that killed that little girl in the Kennedy compound. And I don't think it, I know it. And then Hill and Perry cover me up in all the buildings they run. And they threaten you not to tell my truth. And you know as well as I do, I'm the Fuller, Putnam, Harris, Gardner families. I'm the families that founded America. with George Washington. And they
Williams. We have Williamstown here. Williams saved the settlers here.
Yeah. Yeah,
We have Williamstown.
I was at Robin Williams' home when they told you he committed suicide, and I don't believe that story because I come home and Waldo was dead in her house, and they renamed the Waldo Bridge to Robin Williams Bridge.
Right.
I don't believe the stories that Perry and Mill are telling everybody.
Right.
And then
Waldo married into the Putnam family also.
Yeah. And Waldo lived next door to me. So Waldo was my own cousin. I found her dead in her home and they renamed the Waldo Bridge to Robin Williams Bridge. Robin Williams I went to school with Pam Williams before Robin Williams made his first TV show, Mork and Mindy. Mm-hmm. And Pam Williams was my girlfriend. There's no lie in this. Mm-hmm. And Williams was my father's family.
Right.
Robin Williams looks exactly like my father and his brothers, and they lived in Michigan.
I've seen the pictures. Yeah.
They lived in Michigan with my fathers and his brothers, and they were all in World War II together, my fathers and his brothers, and they had kids all over the place. There was 23 of them. And he married into my mother's family, and my mother is Fuller and Harris and Putnam and all the families that created America. And then Hill and Perry, my second wife, she claims she's my kid's mother, and she's cousin to Hill and Perry, or not Hill and Perry, but Cook and Perry, and they claim they're my children's family, and they're not. They're no relation to my children. So they're taking over the heritage of George Washington on gravestones with lies as they run the government.
Right.
And then they murder my family. They murdered 4 of my wives while I lived on this ranch here, 3 of them while I lived on this ranch here. And they murdered my kids as I lived on this ranch, and nobody went to jail. And my wives were dismembered and murdered on holidays, and nobody went to jail. And the sheriffs in 2 cities, one told me it's not his fault the government's corrupt, as Biden and Obama and Clinton ran the White House. And then the sheriff in the town where they were murdered told me he's just going to leave the murder up to God. And they wrote natural causes on a dismembered body with a slit throat. And my attorney was murdered on his way to the DA on the same day. No report of any murders right there at that ranch. A Civil War ranch owned by Manning, and Manning co-authored the JFK archives. And then, Hill supposedly jumped over Jackie and protected her, but nobody protected Kennedy.
Right.
Isn't that interesting? He
speaks volumes.
Yeah, he protected Jackie, who went and married Anna Sis as I was being raped by 5 governors, and my twin was murdered by those 5 gay governors. Mm-hmm. But he didn't protect the president. Right. And now they're removing his statue. As I mentioned it to you, because Tina Turner's husband died. And I keep saying, who was this girl in the news today? Hughes, another black girl, using my name, Hugh.
No, I didn't catch her name. There was just
Dorothy. All 3 of her names are my family members. Dorothy's my aunt. I'm Hugh. And she's a black
woman. Was her name Hughes? I didn't even catch her name.
Yeah, that's her last name, Hughes.
Unbelievable. Wow.
And as they're taking down the Confederate General Hill's statue in Virginia, my family made Virginia and built the first White House there. We also built the Pentagon. And I had a civil rights case against the people who built the Pentagon on 9/11. They blew up the civil rights case on 9/11. And Americans did this, not Muslims.
Right.
That was a big
Clearly.
con. That was a big con from Bush and his friends. They had your generation murdered all those Muslims, and Americans and Christians blew up the Twin Towers. And I'm living proof of this. And you know I have all the documents. That's why you wrote my book. The documents will be in my book. So Hill was never my friend, and that's evident.
Yeah.
I was on the Civil War farm. Virginia is right next to the Civil War farm, Bristol, Virginia, Bristol, Tennessee. It's right there on the same expressway on the back of my ranch. And Hill was Confederate. And my northern family pushed the Confederates back at that farm. So they came and murdered my wives.
Right.
Obama and Biden, and now they give you Black Lives Matter, but my history doesn't matter.
Now you had Premier
I'm
Net.
the, I'm the northern family that freed
Uh-huh.
all the black people with Lincoln.
Right. Well, think about this with the connection with Hill too. You had Premier Networks there surrounding the ranch down there in Tennessee, and then Benny Hill and his wife, I forgot his wife's name. They were an interracial couple that they were said to be the first UFO abductees
Yeah, and
back in the 50s.
they hide my abduction at 4 at S,
Right.
and my family built S4. I'm well aware of
Right.
all things. And Hill in my life has always been kidnapping my kids, selling drugs, murdering people. That's who Hill is. And they're Confederates. I'm the northern families who helped Lincoln put an end to slavery. But my history doesn't matter. Only black history matters. They murdered my whole family 5 times. My family is the family given George Washington's sword in the first Masonic Lodge, the Grapes of Tavern Lodge, in the first colony.
Yeah.
But my history doesn't matter. This is unbelievable. And Joe Biden is doing this as he covers me up with black women who take my family names. I'm Jackson on a 20. They're going to replace him with Taubman, a black woman. He's already replaced me with a Supreme Court justice named Jackson. I'm the Jackson family. I've had two uncles who were Supreme Court justices, Fuller and another one. They murder my family and replace them with black women who aren't even related to me. My family didn't own slaves. And the only family member who did was Jackson, and he freed all the slaves before he ran to be president. It's just unbelievable what Clinton and Biden and Trump are doing to me with this Black Lives Matter. But I have 4 wives and 5 kids murdered, and all in the same day on a holiday. And my history doesn't matter.
Right.
My family founded the country. What kind of BS is this, Mr. Biden? And then you say that you're not replacing me? You're such a liar. You're as bad as Donald Trump.
Absolutely. Betty and Barney Hill, that was their names. So I remember it now. Yeah.
And then you had the Benny Hill comedy from London. They make fun of me, Greg.
Yeah.
They murder my family. They murder my whole family, and they make comedies about it in London. The Stones claimed he murdered the Kennedys with Hugh. Who killed the Kennedys? After all, it was me and Hugh. He goes back to Canada, gets thrown in jail for dealing the same drugs on my farm I bought from Trump's tax attorney. He goes back to the Queen, and she knighted him.
Right.
And then what were the Beatles giving everybody in California? Haight-Ashbury, LSD, cocaine. Remember the Maharisha? They were giving you drugs. They go back to London. She knights them, and you all think she's your ally.
And Jagger marries Hall, and Hall's one of your rapists.
Daryl Hall, who raped me with Osborne. That's correct. That's absolutely correct, Greg. And he married Hall before he came over here and sang he killed my cousin Kennedy. And I'm related to all the presidents on U.S. money, but my history doesn't matter. Only Black history matters. And
Right,
I'm the
right.
fam. I'm the there. I'm sitting right here in front of my Civil War ranch in Mossheim, Tennessee, where my northern family turned back to South and freed all the slaves, but my history doesn't matter. As you murder my whole family 5 times, and you murdered my kids along with my parents and along with my wives. You murdered my kids. You murdered 5 Duncan kids on the day you murdered Kennedy. They were my friends. Mr. Duncan was my friend my whole life through. And then you got another TV series, Duncan McCloud. Mick was my older brother who was supposed to be watching me when I was kidnapped by the 5 governors who tortured and raped me and murdered my twin. You got Duncan McCloud as they murdered the Duncan kids, and you got Agatha Christie, arsenic and old lace as they murdered the Duncan kids with arsenic. And then the new president, Johnson, took over, gets sworn in, and the first thing he does is call my family's home. And I was being kidnapped with Sirhan's kid in 1957, on the same day they murdered Admiral Byrd. This is how criminal our government has become. And if my history doesn't matter, Black history does not matter. And I have no qualms about saying that. And I'm not racist. I grew up on an Indian reservation and in Black families' homes because you murdered my whole family 5 times since 1945. You've murdered my whole family, the U.S. government. And now you hide me behind Black history as you steal the names of the people you murdered. Thank you, Joe Biden. You're the biggest prick I've ever known. And so are you, Kamala Harris. I know that you know Gilbert Hill in Detroit and L. Brooks Patterson and Sheriff Hackle. And I know that you and your husband helped steal my trademark. And now you're using the Harris name and your real name is Emhoff. Oh, Emhoff. And her father murdered Hoffa. Gee, what a cover up this is, Mr. Biden. You're the worst president this country's ever known. I thought it was Trump. It's you, Mr. Biden. You're as bad as Trump. In the Paul family, Paul was my business manager at Bottomline. As he sold out my trademark Bottomline to the Russia mafia, Biden just let go for a drug dealing basketball player. And gee, I played basketball with Mr. Garrison. And Garrison and Manning created the JFK archives, which is a big crock of BS. There I am on the Manning Ranch, and you murdered my whole family 5 times to hide my truth, Joe Biden, Mr. Obama. Obama, where did you get all that money to go to Harvard? Harvard, did my cousin, the Queen of England, hand it to you? And I know that's what happened.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
This is unbelievable. If my history doesn't matter, Black history does not matter. Because I'm the northern families that freed the slaves. And you same slaves are murdering my family with white people who put you in the White House. And Kamala Harris, your own father wrote a book and said that he was a slave trader in Africa. He was selling the slaves. He was selling the slaves my family was stopping with Lincoln.
And selling them to people like Biden's ancestors who enslaved them.
He has the gall to be vice president and pretend she's my family. You're the very family selling the slaves, Kamala. And you're not my family. I'm 100% European, and we didn't marry Blacks. And I'm not prejudiced. I grew up with the Jackson family and with people like Ike Turner and Smokey Robinson. Ella Fitzgerald was singing to me with JC Hurd when I was 15 years old. JC Hurd, the best black drummer on earth, was my friend. I would go to his house every day of my life. I'd go to the lounges he played in. I'd play drums with him. I'm not prejudiced, but I am prejudiced against people lying about history as they murder my family's. You're murdering my family's members and stealing our names, and there's no lie in this. We can end this here, Greg, unless you got something else to say.
Man, that was there's just so much to that. That's powerful information. And
It's true.
yeah,
It's true.
yeah.
They don't take me to court because they know it's truth. They just don't allow me on the news. They give you Wallace. Wallace kidnapped me at 4 in 57 and tortured and raped me. They give you Long. Huey P. Long's family kidnapped me and tortured me in Osborne's basement. Osborne was governor of Michigan.
Yeah, Holt. They put Holt everywhere.
I know the Holt family.
Yeah.
I grew up with the Holt family.
And Garrett and
Holt
O'Donnell.
Holt was the detective that didn't report my wife's murder in Greene County, where that farm is. Holt was the detective, and the sheriff pulled her off the case and told me it's not his fault the government's corrupt and didn't file murder charges. Mrs. Holt was the detective.
Right.
And you know as well as I do, Holt is in the news right now. And Holt is Sonny and Cher's mother. That's Cher's mother, Mrs. Holt. Holt.
Yeah, lots of Holt's running news now.
Yeah,
lots
and
of Holt
I'm a
journalists.
publisher. I'm Sonny and Cher's publisher at ASCAP and BMI. They stole my trademark, Bottomline. 28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts, including Sonny and Cher. And Sonny and Cher's mother is the detective who did not file my wife's murder case.
And that's something.
Yeah. And this goes deeper than this, Greg. And this is all about stealing my money at birth. They stole my inheritance. They stole the bus patents. They stole the milk truck patents. They stole the Fuller transmission patents. They stole the van patents from me. Then that wasn't enough. They stole my name, Hugh Francis Squire, gave you Huey Lewis in the news and Billy Squire. The Pope took my middle name, Francis, that communist Pope. Mm-hmm. As they stole my trademark worth $3 trillion in entertainment contracts. And then I'm supposed to feel sorry because Cher's mother, Mrs. Holt, who didn't file my wife's murder case, she died. Oh, that's terrible.
O'Donnell's all over the media.
People who have done this to me in the entertainment industry, all of you. Ted Nugent, Twisted Sister, Cher, Burt Reynolds, Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton. I'm living right there in Tennessee next to Dolly Parton's father. He died one Christmas before I moved on to that Manning Ranch. And then you murdered all my family members, and all of you know this. All of you know I was an ASCAP publisher, and I was fighting for you to get money from airlines, from cable TV, and you turned around and stole my trademark, my publishing contracts, and then murdered my entire family 4 times and murdered my children.
Every entertainer in the country is making huge amounts of money because of.
They all know who I am. I'm the guy that rewrote the Berne Convention with Ted Kennedy in the Senate. And Graham. And Graham covered me up in all media when they kidnapped me in Detroit. He owns Channel 4 and WWJ. Right. He covered me up with Osborne and Barr. And they all know this. Trump knows it. Biden and Clinton know it. And they're all a bunch of criminals, all 3 parties. The Independent was my business manager at Bottomline in 1965 as I married Nancy. Nancy's father was Joe Jacob. He handed Bill Gates, my cousin, the software to make his first computer, and then Cook tried to rape me after murdering her after marrying her brother. And 3 hours after she married my wife's brother, she tried to have sex with me. And he ran Fort Knox during the Vietnam War. You people are all disgusting. And all of you know what you've done to me. And none of you will admit it. Cook and Perry, Mills offered me a contract, $1 million contract through Bourne Publishing, not to keep my publishing license in ASCAP, New York, over dinner. And then Mills went on the following years, and he interviewed Trump as the first plane hit the first tower. And Bush said, Hugh's structures are collapsing. He said my name. And my girlfriend put him in the kindergarten class he was in down in Florida. I lived in Florida prior to that. I lived at the Hemingway house. And then Garrett at CBS and Walters at CBS. You murdered my attorney and wife and destroyed my income. As you murdered my wife and attorney, CBS destroyed my only income. So I couldn't hire a lawyer to replace the one you murdered on his way to the DA. The Walters family at CBS, Walters and Cronkite covered Kennedy's murder at CBS. Walters' phone, my wife's advocate, was used as they slit her throat Halloween Eve. So somebody standing on Walter's phone in my wife's hospital bed as they slit her throat Halloween Eve at 10 o'clock at night screamed Slater over the phone. Walter's phone, Barbara Walters' phone. And the Walters family, they asked me to burn down all their homes and their college. They were going to give me $10,000 every time I burned their property down. I told them, no, thank you. They were trying, just like they tried to set me up as a drug dealer. They told me I robbed banks. They told me I murdered Jimmy Hoffa. They were trying to convict me of arson right there on the Manning Ranch. It's unbelievable. And then you murder my wives, hiding the truth of Kennedy's murder and the theft you stole from me as you murdered Admiral Byrd and hid me in S4. This is disgusting what you people have done. And I'm never going to shut up. And I'm going to keep making these videos till you kill me again.
So they took the Walters name and put her as the lawyer that was the She-Hulk on the next Avengers series here, and then I turn around and I call my own lawyers on retainer for a matter, and I find out I answer the phone and lawyer Mrs. Walters answers the phone. It's unbelievable the way they do this.
Yeah, well, Stanley Walter is my half brother who stole my inheritance. We should end this here, Greg.
All right.
The last time they put me in jail in Oakland County, as I reported a murder, they wouldn't let me call my attorney. And I had 50 attorneys, and they were all corporate attorneys because I owned Bottomline Publishing in New York. And I had to pay taxes in every country on earth. 264 countries weekly. And they stole the trademark and my publishing license and my name, put me in jail, and wouldn't let me call my own corporate attorneys. Unbelievable. They appointed to me a woman who wasn't even an attorney. She was still going to college to become an attorney. And I had 50 corporate attorneys, and there's no lie in this. And then they threw me in jail again. Good night, Greg. I'll email this to you.
Bye.
You can put it up on YouTube and in a group and on my page. Every word I've said is truth. And Joe Biden, you're the worst president I've ever known. You're a liar, a criminal, and a thief. And you sold out the whole country to China. Bye, Greg.
Bye.